But let's crack on with my very first guest on my very first show. I'm absolutely delighted to have with me in the studio Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Hello, Keir.
Hello, afternoon.
I'm so pleased that you're here, and I have noticed something very distinct about you. Do I detect a haircut has occurred?
A haircut has occurred this morning after many months. I was able to go to my local barber and get my hair cut.
Were you? What you're meant to say is you did it specially for coming into Times Radio.
Especially for the photographs for coming in today. It was really great, and I know people across the country wanting to get their hair cut, but
Yeah, I mean,
it was great to go and get it cut.
I think you've obviously pulled some strings to get that. I couldn't get in to see my hairdresser, although she did actually message me saying, we need to talk, you need to come in and get your hair done. I think I was actually dragging her reputation down, such was the state of my hair. But look, obviously today's a huge day with lockdown easing. Are you supportive of the government easing lockdown today?
Look, today is a massive day, and it's a real test. We've supported the easing of restrictions, and we've supported the government on that. But we've been very mindful of the risks. So we're saying be very cautious. The virus hasn't gone away. There are things we can do today that we weren't able to do yesterday, but be cautious about it. Be careful about it. And my message really to the government is this is a big test for you. We're supporting you in easing the restrictions, but you absolutely have to be on top of the risks, and that means things like test, track and trace really have to work, and there has to be a much better way of dealing with local outbreaks. We saw in Leicester.
We've seen in
Yeah, we
Leicester,
saw an outbreak in Leicester. The government finally took action this Monday, but it had taken 11 days before anything happened, and that was too slow. And now I think it's about 4,000 businesses are closed in Leicester that would otherwise have been open, and 160 schools are closed. Nobody wants that, and so there's got to be an effective way of dealing with local outbreaks that is quicker than what happened in Leicester. I think there's got to be sharing of information with those on the ground as well. There was a lot of grumbling in Leicester by the local authority and the mayor that they hadn't had the information they needed about the number of cases, the number of tests, etc., and they needed that. And a lot of local authorities have said to me, if we could get the data early, we could probably take lesser measures and keep things going. So this is a big test of the government, I think.
And you and your shadow chancellor, Annalise Dodds, have been talking about the damage to the economy. You, by your own admission, have said, look, this is a really important issue. So do you support the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who has said people have a civic duty to get out there today and, in the coming weeks to go to restaurants, go to pubs, get the economy moving?
I wouldn't say civic duty, but look, I've talked to a lot of businesses across the United Kingdom, big and small, and they're all struggling and they're all very, very worried. And for every business, there's all the people that work in that business. And a lot of them are on the edge. And amongst the reasons we supported the government in what they're doing this weekend is because we do need the economy to open up. We do need schools to be able to get back. So there are things that need to happen. And lots of businesses have said we can't go on much longer like this. And we've been living through a dreadful health crisis, and we all shudder when we see the figures. 65,000 people have lost their lives because of coronavirus. That's shocking, and we feel that across the nation. For every figure, for every number, there's a family shaken to the ground. We've been shielded to some extent because of the support the government's put in, quite rightly, from the economic consequences.
Which you very much supported.
Which we did. I mean, when the government said we're going to introduce furlough or support for the self-employed, we supported that. We said that's the right thing to do. There have been some gaps and there's been some implementation problems, but by and large, we've supported that. The position now is that the government's winding up those schemes. Now, for some sectors of the economy where they can perhaps get back to a degree of normality, that's understandable. There are other areas that can't. Hospitality, travel, just not going to be able to get back in time for the cut-off in October.
And indeed theatres and creative industries and the arts.
So what we've said to the government is you should extend the support where it's needed to make sure that viable businesses and jobs aren't lost. Because, what I fear is job losses, the like of which we haven't seen for a generation. And, real livelihoods are at stake here, and we've got to do everything we can to protect jobs. It's one of the reasons that the government has been saying build, build, build. We've been saying jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, nobody's against building. Nobody doesn't want hospitals and schools to be built. But what we can't have is jobs lost this autumn in their millions. And that's the real fear.
And I mean, that is a fear which is, shared across political stripes. But surely then there is some truth in Rishi Sunak saying that maybe we do have a civic duty in a way. If we don't go out, these jobs will evaporate.
Oh, I think people will go out. I've been out today. People are out. They're out in restaurants. They're out in pubs. I just wouldn't call it a civic duty. But look, I'm not going to shy away from this. We support the government in the easing of restrictions. We want the economy to work. We don't want good, viable businesses to go broke. And we don't want people to lose their jobs. But it's got to be done cautiously. And therefore, people have to take real care, socially distance, follow the government's advice. And although we're the opposition, I've spent the last few months every time I can saying follow the government's advice, and everybody please follow the government's advice. But equally, the government is being tested here. They've got to up their game on track, trace and isolate, and they've got to up their game on what they do about local spikes if there are any. They're the two things that matter most.
What about the messaging? Because you said everyone's got to heed the government advice, but looks like there's a bit of confusion with the government advice. Do you think they've got that right?
No, the messaging's been all over the place. You've had some government messaging saying, go out and have a drink. Other messaging saying, be responsible, be cautious. The messaging, I think, has been very poor over the last few weeks. I think it began to break down when the Dominic Cummings incident happened. And since then, you can feel the public have struggled with the messaging from the government. And some of the way in which the Prime Minister has behaved hasn't helped. You may recall last week was the week before last was a very, very hot week, boiling hot week. And in Parliament, we had Peter Kyle, who's the MP for Hove, saying directly to the Prime Minister, I'm really worried because in Brighton, what I think will happen with this hot weather is that thousands of people will flock to the beach. We won't have social distancing and it's going to be very difficult. What advice do you give? The Prime Minister just said to him, have some guts. I think that was very flippant. And of course, then 2 days after that in Bournemouth, we saw 500,000 people packed onto a beach. And the whole beach then had to be closed. So the messaging has been all over the place and it needs to improve.
Right, just moving on, wanted to just raise with you the issue of Black Lives Matter. We've got the Reverend Jesse Jackson coming on the show later today. Now, you took the knee, which was seen as, quite an important symbol, but then offended a lot of people who support Black Lives Matter, who felt you rather dismissed it as a moment rather than a movement. Do you regret that?
Well, can I just explain what I meant by a moment? Because what I meant was a defining moment. In the last few weeks, many, many black community leaders have said to me, this has got to be a turning point. This has got to be a defining moment. What we can't do is just put it down to, another time when, for a short while, people recognised what was going on and then nothing really changed. So their strong message to me was, it's got to be a moment, if you like. And that's the sense in which I meant it. When you have that emotional connection where you say, this is a moment when people are beginning to get it. Now, unfortunately, some people thought that was dismissive. It was actually intended to say, this is bigger than we realise. This is defining. This has got to be a turning point, and that's a challenge for all of us. Insofar as some people heard it differently, then of course I regret that. That absolutely isn't what I meant. I actually meant, let's treat this for what it needs to be, which is a turning point. And that's the challenge I put to the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's Questions, because, again, I had a Zoom roundtable, as they always are at the moment, with black community leaders the day before PMQs. And they were saying to me, don't go down the road of another review. We've had so many reviews in the United Kingdom into inequalities in race. We've had reviews into criminal justice. We've had Windrush. We've had reviews into representation on boards. We've had reviews on the pay gap. What we need is those reviews and those recommendations to be implemented. And I think they listed about 200 recommendations. So I was really trying to convey what they'd said to me,
But
which
if
is,
I
this is
could,
going to be a turning
sure,
point.
if I could just turn it back to the Labour Party, a lot of people were upset by those comments. And do you acknowledge that a lot of Black and Asian people in the Labour Party movement feel a bit raw about this, but also about the lack of diversity in the Labour Party as well, particularly amongst senior staffers? Most of them do tend to be white. I mean, I know this from my own experience when I myself was a senior staff, and I think I was the only ethnic minority person in it. That was a long time ago, and it doesn't feel like that much has changed. I mean, what do you want to do to make change within your own Labour Party on this issue?
The first thing we have to do is to listen to the points that people are making to us. And I've spoken to our Black and minority ethnic staff organisation a number of times, and they've made precisely that point to me. And I have said, well, we need to do something about it. And we have agreed already we'll have an audit, we'll have a diversity and inclusion board, and we'll have a plan of action with our staff so we can measure how we're
But
getting along.
in the same way that you rightly said, the Black leaders said to you, look, we don't need another review from the Prime Minister. Does the Labour Party need another internal review? Or could you actually crack on and maybe hire some good Black and Asian senior people?
Oh, we need to crack on and do it. And that's exactly what I did. Before I was in politics, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service. We had 8,000 staff. And that's exactly what we did. We cracked on and we dealt with this with our staff networks. And in the David Lammy report into race inequality in the criminal justice system, he singled out the Crown Prosecution Service as an example of an organisation that actually did have Black representation at all levels in a way which was, the staff felt was properly representative of the population. And that's what I want to achieve. And we'll already start down that route.
And do you have any Black advisors?
Yes, I do, yes.
And you want to do more in the Labour Party in terms of, do you have a figure in mind or a percentage in mind?
Oh, well, we'll agree a percentage with the staff, but I absolutely want more Black people working in the Labour Party, and I want our party to be seen as an anti-racist party that proudly displays the values of equality in everything that we do.
And there is a feeling from some Black people within the Labour Party that there is a bit of an anti-Black sentiment in the party, particularly against some prominent female Black MPs like Diane Abbott, as was revealed in the leaked document. What are you going to? I mean, you've been very strong on anti-Semitism to your credit, but will you show the Black community the same empathy?
Absolutely. There's no hierarchy of racism in the Labour Party, nor should there be. We will be very robust on anti-Semitism. We'll be very robust on anti-Black racism and demonstrate that. And some of our MPs, Diane Abbott, has had abuse for years and years and years.
I think she's one of the MPs who has had the most abuse in the country.
I think that's right. But there are many other examples, but she simply had more than anybody else. I'm determined, just as determined as we are going to stamp out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and we are going to stamp out racism in the Labour Party wherever it rears its head. And that's why we've already taken action in relation to the leaked report. Angela Rayner and I set up an independent inquiry straight away. But we also got the independent processes working, and action has been taken.
And when is that due to report?
The disciplinary action is going on now, the internal stuff, that started straight away. The independent report I had hoped would report in July. It may now be September, but I want it to report as soon as possible. But I felt it very important that the internal measures went on regardless. One of the frustrations I've had is that the internal disciplinary measures are confidential, and therefore it wasn't for me to say what action we'd taken against which individuals, even though we had taken action. And so I was very often in meetings with people saying to me, nothing's been done, when in fact I knew very well things had been done, but I didn't want to breach the confidence of the process. But,
Sure.
It will all be transparent, it'll all be there.
What would be great is if, because I know this is something that our, listeners do care about. So, when the report is out, it'd be great if you could, come back and we could sort of, pick this up. I think this would be a great topic to...
Very happily deal with that. There's no hierarchy. As I say, I want to stamp out anti-Semitism and I want to stamp out racism in the party in all its shapes and all its forms, and we're determined to do that. I've only just got my feet under the desk. I'm 3 months in today, so In terms of the overall staffing structures and issues in the Labour Party, to some extent, we're inheriting them. But that's not, that's mitigation, not an excuse. We've got a job of work to do.
Now, speaking of things you have, personnel issues you have inherited, we had the leader of Unite Union, Len McCluskey, in the studio sitting where you are just a few days ago with John Pienaar. This was just after you had sacked Rebecca Long-Bailey from the shadow cabinet. And he said he was unhappy, and he said that you couldn't win without the left. Let's have a listen to what he said.
He knows that in order for him to become Prime Minister at the next general election, he has to have a united party. Now, that effectively means carrying with him all elements of the party. And all of the data shows that our membership are wholeheartedly behind the radical nature of the policies that have been developed under Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. And therefore, I'm expecting Keir to abide by that and to stick to that. And obviously, certain things will happen from time to time which question the issue of unity, but it is his priority, and that means he needs the left of the party. Without the left of the party, he has no chance of becoming Prime Minister.
Is Len right?
Len said we need a united party, and he's absolutely right about that.
But is he right on the left? Do you need the left to win? Do you need him to win?
Look, I think the Labour Party has always been a broad church, and I want it to be a broad church. That's one of our very great strengths. But we must be united. In the last few months and years, we've been taking lumps out of ourselves. And one of the oldest sayings in politics is that divided parties don't win elections. And it's one of the oldest sayings because it's true. And I ran my entire leadership campaign on the basis we needed to unite the party, not defeat this bit of the party or defeat that part of the party, but actually pull together. We've got 580,000 members. We're the biggest political party in Europe. We ought to be an unstoppable political force, but only if we pull together. So I want a broad church, and I want everybody heading in the right direction with unity of purpose.
But I mean, that's a noble ambition. But the Labour Party, since its history and its inception, has always been sort of riven with a lot of factionalism. And one of the things that was very interesting was your sacking of Rebecca Long-Bailey, because that to many seemed to trigger a bit of a civil war in the party between people who were more loyal to Jeremy Corbyn, who went before you. And in a way, it was good for you because it showed that you could pick a fight, and it showed that you were in control of the party. Was that some of the thinking behind the Rebecca Long-Bailey decision?
Well, let me just trace through your question. Firstly, I don't think unity is just a noble crusade. I think it's absolutely vital. It's absolutely vital. And we cannot be factional. And people say to me, that's not possible, Keir. You can't have a Labour Party that's not factional. And I say that's rubbish. In my leadership campaign, I put together a campaign team deliberately that had people from different parts of the party in it. And we modelled and showed that actually they could pull together with a central purpose. Since the leadership election, actually the story of the Labour Party has been people getting together, coming together in a way that hasn't happened for a long time. So that is really good. Rebecca,
I just pick you up on one thing that I would say actually the story of the Labour Party since you've won is you really asserting yourself over the Labour Party, getting rid of some of the people who were from the previous administration, stamping your authority on the party and saying, this is the kind of party I'm going to lead.
Well, what I've tried to do is to put together a diverse shadow cabinet, a diverse front bench, with people with different backgrounds, coming from different parts of the party, but with an absolute focus on winning the next general election. Because I've said we need to be united, we need to be a very effective opposition, particularly just at the moment, and we have to be unrelentingly focused on winning the next general election. I came into politics to change lives. I think that's why people are in the Labour Party and the Labour movement, to change lives for the better. You can't do that if you don't win general elections. And frankly, you can call yourself what you like in opposition. If you're in opposition, you are not taking decisions that change people's lives for the better. So an unrelenting focus on winning that next general election. And that's the whole basis upon which I put the shadow cabinet together.
I mean, in order to win that general election, at some point, you may well have to break with what went before you. You know, you've been very supportive of the Jeremy Corbyn platform, but there may come a point where you're trying to win that general election where you need to decide, are you going to pick where the public are? Or are you going to pick where the membership are to sort of keep unity?
Well, we need to focus on winning that next general election. Of course, that means change. We just lost a general election really badly.
And you're prepared to have those tough conversations with the
lost
party.
that election really badly, but we've lost 4 elections in a row. And we've just had a pretty brutal report published into why that happened. We've got to learn the lessons, because I don't want us to walk into losing the next general election. So, of course, we've got to change. Of course, we've got to improve. If we don't do that, we'll lose the next general election. And it's a mountain to climb, because we've got our seats in the north, the northeast, northwest, and the Midlands, which we lost, the so-called red wall seats, and we've got to win them back. We've got a job of work to do in Scotland, in North Wales, and across the south of England. But I'm absolutely determined that we're going to climb that mountain. But we have to be united in what we do.
I mean, on that mountain, which I think your report actually said it was more Mount Everest than a mountain, and there are very important elections coming up in Scotland next year, and the Labour Party is having a really, really difficult time in Scotland. How are you going to try and win seats in Scotland? Because if you can't win Westminster without winning in Scotland.
No, you're absolutely right. We've got a big test next May. We've got elections across the United Kingdom, but in particular elections in Scotland. And we have to do 2 things in those elections. We have to win in Scotland. We have to win as many seats as we can in the Scottish Parliament, because that's very important in Scotland.
Do you think you might come second? Do you think you could come second?
Well, I would hope we can, but I absolutely understand the nature of the task. So it's what happens in Scotland next year that matters for Scotland, but it also matters because it'll be a measure of how well we're doing on the journey towards the next general election, which will probably be 2024. And there's no route for the Labour Party into power in Westminster that doesn't run through Scotland. So Scotland is among my top priorities, and we're already working on it.
And what's your position on the looming question of a second referendum on Scottish independence?
Look, I don't want to tear the United Kingdom apart. I don't think that's the right way forward. But equally, I accept that people are frustrated with the status quo. And we have to understand, I think, that in Scotland, as elsewhere across the United Kingdom, people want decisions about them made closer to them. And therefore, I'm completely up for a discussion about more devolved powers, more influence being in Scotland. I think there could be a very radical way forward here. But I don't want to tear the United Kingdom apart, because I don't think that's in Scotland's interest. And it certainly isn't in the interests of the United Kingdom.
Well, I mean, the future of the Union is going to be fascinating to see as we go forward. But look, as we're easing out of lockdown today, and of course you've had your 3 months, what's been the best and the worst day of your leadership so far? Not including winning, obviously. What's been the best and the worst?
Well, the best day has to be the day on which I won it, because it's an incredible privilege to lead the Labour Party, the party that I've supported since I was, basically a boy, and to lead that great party that's done amazing things. Of course, we lost the last election badly, but this is the Labour Party that created the National Health Service. This is the Labour Party that brought in equal pay and equalities legislation. This is a Labour Party that brought in Sure Start. There are so many brilliant things that the Labour Party has done, and to be the leader of that party is an incredible privilege.
And how did you get the chance to celebrate?
Well, it was. I was about to say it was a bit of an odd day, because when we started the campaign way back in January, when things were so different, and we were running around the country trying to see as many people as possible, I imagined that day would be the day in which, to a packed hall of thousands of people, I would finally speak not just to the membership of the Labour Party, but to the nation as a whole, turn and face the nation almost. Because of lockdown, I had to do it in my own living room with a microphone and a camera as my only audience. So I was addressing an armchair as I was trying to address.
Quite good to get off to a humble start, isn't it?
It was good. It was good. But
and what's been the worst thing? What's been the worst thing?
Well, the worst thing, I think, is dealing with things like the leaked report. I think that was shocking. It was disappointing that it was leaked, shocking when you read the contents of it. And what I don't want to do is for the Labour Party to get sucked back into talking to itself and about itself. The Labour Party has to speak out to the public, engage with the public, talk to voters, and let less attention on ourselves, less internal, more external, and that's what I want to do.
Final question before we let you go. Is it help or a hindrance being a sir?
I don't really think it makes that much difference either way. I was knighted for services to criminal justice, and that was partly the role I did as Director of Public Prosecutions, partly other work I'd done fighting the death penalty across the world for many, many years. So I was very proud to be recognised for having fought in justice for a large part of my life. I don't use it, but I'm not particularly, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, the tradition in the Crown Prosecution Service was to call the Director of Public Prosecutions Director. So instead of calling me Keir, people called me Director. And I didn't like it. I just said, call me Keir. And now it's the same thing. Actually, Keir has worked all my life very well. People have called me a lot worse. But Keir works very well for me.
And you don't think it will be a hindrance when you're trying to win back some of those red wall voters?
Well, it's really interesting you asked that, because I've been determined to get out to the seats where we lost badly, to talk to people, particularly those that voted Labour in the past but aren't voting Labour now. We've done these, because we can't do it physically, we've done these cool Keir sessions where we get people from a particular locality onto a virtual meeting, and I've done about 14, 15 of them now. I've gone to exactly the places where we've lost, exactly what people are calling the red wall areas, and I've asked for people to challenge me to be blunt and be frank, and asked for people who didn't necessarily vote Labour. And in all of those discussions, and we've had hours of them now, not a single one has raised the question of whether I'm a sir. And by the way, not a single one has raised the question of whether I live in London. What they want to know is, are you listening to me? Do you get it? And are we going to have a proper conversation about things that matter to me? And I think that tells you everything. So whilst, in some areas people say, oh, well, the sir thing's the most important or the least important thing, actually, in those conversations, not come up once.
And we've just as we're all leaving lockdown, what was your big lesson, your personal thing you'll take away from lockdown? Not necessarily a professional thing, but a personal thing that you found.
The personal thing has probably been the thing that has been shared across, I think, every family across the United Kingdom, and that is my wife's dad is elderly and is living on his own, and we've been really worried about him. And that has been very difficult, not being able to go in and hug him, etc. And for the children of my wife, that's been very, very difficult.
Does he live near you?
He lives nearby, so we've been able to see him, and I know other people haven't even had that. That's a very small thing, but it probably represents, I think, what many, many families have been going through, and that is that anguish, I suppose, about not being able to be with loved ones. And in the end, it's that human thing, I think, that matters to all of us. The most important thing about lockdown is not going to the pub, not going to the restaurant, not doing other things, all of which we all get
your haircuts are very
No,
important.
it's actually the thing that matters most is being able to see people we love. And I know for families across the United Kingdom, that is the single most important thing.
It certainly is. Sir Keir Starmer, I'll call you sir. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today and on Times Radio. Really appreciate you taking the time.